Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Tables with your host, Rob Bradley,
John Charles Ciccarelli,
James Burrows,
and Damien Hallwood.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Tales from the Tables, a Rolldark podcast episode 53, and I am joined this week by my co-host James.
Hello.
Hi James. And special guest for the second time on the podcast, Ben.
Hello.
Hello. I like it. Very bassy, very ASMR there. Welcome, Ben. You're going to bring in more listeners for us.
I'm just going to start stroking the microphone with a feather brush. It's a whole new outlet.
You can't see it at home, but he has a feather brush. It appeared out of nowhere.
It's like he knew. Well, welcome everyone to episode 53 of Tales from the Tables, a podcast for Rolldark, a professional GM agency here in the UK, but catering internationally. You can go to rolldark.co.uk right now, and you can find a professional GM for hire for a long form, short form, one-shot, in-person or online game of Dungeons & Dragons or another tabletop role-playing game, or join one of our in-person live events across the year. They're always a lot of fun to gather together and roll dice with all of our nerdy friends. Any and all of those are available to you. Head there and tailor something to you and start the adventure of your dreams. Welcome, everyone. All right. We're gonna dive into some news here. We've only got Ben for a limited time, so I'm going to skip the small talk, if you'll forgive me. And we'll dive into the news.
I imagine most people will forgive us.
Yeah, most people like, thank God.
Oh, Jesus.
It's like, no, the 30-minute preamble is part of the experience.
That's what we like to tell ourselves.
Indeed. All right, so as last week, I've collated a few news articles from across the week, and including those from the previous week, if you've got them available, that we're going to sort of take it in turns picking. And as guest this week, Ben, I'm going to hand it over to you to pick your story of the tabletop role-playing game world for this week.
Well, thank you. I wanted to talk about the recent Mike Mearls interview. This has kind of been doing the rounds. He did an interview with Ben Riggs where he was talking about Dungeons & Dragons having had its moment and being uncool again. It's quite an interesting read. I recommend checking it out if you haven't already. For those of you who don't know, Mike Mearls was one of the key designers at Wizards of the Coast up until 2023. So, yeah, it's quite interesting to see somebody so closely entwined with 5th edition and how someone who made that game kind of what it is today, talking smack about his former employers. Have you guys had a chance to check this out yet, by the way? Or
I've read bits of it, yeah.
I've had a bit of a read through some of the key moments. I was particularly interested in his thoughts and musings on what happened with the sort of OGL situation that they had a while back when the internet screamed at them for that. That was quite an interesting read, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that Hasbro dropped the ball when it came to that. It again, as Mike Mearls himself quite adequately points out, that the whole point of this is creativity on the players' part. So if you're not going to have players actually being creative, then there's not really much of a game here. You've just got people throwing dice at each other. But yeah, one thing that I did find quite interesting is like his analogy about music, where because he was talking about. I'm just going to read directly from the article where he starts plugging his Patreon. It says, this time last year, I was looking into my post-Wizards options. I thought, well, maybe I could start doing 5e compatible stuff. And now what I'm finding is I just don't want to. Like, it just seems boring. It's like trying to start a hair metal band in 1992. Like, no. Everyone's mopey and we're wearing flannel. It's Seattle and rain. It's Nirvana now, man. It's not like Poison. And that's the vibe I get right now. Like, Poison was still releasing albums in the 90s. They were selling hundreds of thousands or millions of copies, but they didn't have the energy. It moved on. But that's what's interesting to me is that role-playing game culture is still there. And that's what I find fascinating about gaming in general, especially TTRPGs. I don't think we've ever had a period where TTRPGs were flourishing and had a lot of energy and excitement around them, and D&D wasn't on the upswing. because I do think that's what's happening now. So yeah, I find that quite interesting, because this is something that I personally, and you guys know this, I personally have been screaming at players for like years now. It's like, D&D is not the only game out there. There's so much more out there. And for the love of God, stop homebrewing stuff into 5e to make it more like another game. If you want to play Pathfinder, just play Pathfinder.
Agreed. I've been a bit of an advocate of, albeit something of a Modifius stand for their products, but I've been a bit of an advocate of trying to get other games up and running. Having a currently successful Fallout game running weekly has been a blessing. And I know we've been talking a little before we got recording here that you've been running some systems that you've found interesting. I've been running some systems I've found interesting, and he's right. We're in a world where most IP that you know of has a TTRPG equivalent. Some notable exceptions that we've mentioned many times on this podcast.
Ghostbusters,
Ghostbusters, Mass Effect. We're looking at you. But we have an absolute wealth of systems, and some of them have some really interesting mechanics geared towards making it feel like you're in that world.
Yeah.
We talked last week about Dread and 10 Candles being a brilliant way of just inherently encouraging stress in players, even before you get to the horrifying monster that's breathing down their neck. They're already stressed out because they've got to pull a block from a Jenga tower and their hand is trembling.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting to hear him talk specifically about the world that we're in now.
I find it quite interesting that he uses music as an analogy as well.
Yeah.
Because again, I am a musician. For those of you out there, check out my Instagram profile and Facebook, Ben Mearls Rocks, on all your social media. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we are finding a lot more of in the music world is that rather than people, because we're no longer in a situation where people have to listen to the radio. I haven't listened to the radio in I can't remember how long. And so I'm able to pick out what music I personally want. And so we are kind of seeing this situation where we don't really have mainstream acts anymore. It's more niche acts that kind of pick out a very specific sound for themselves, and people flock to them because I want that. And I think it's interesting that, yeah, we are kind of starting to see a little bit of that bleed over into the tabletop role-playing space as well, that, again, people are able to pick more specific stuff, not only about the mechanics they want, but the settings they want and the style of game they want. And it is nice to see people start experimenting with that and doing things that are very particular to them. That kind of leads me on to the other thing I wanted to talk about, because, again, you kind of keyed me up for this. I have been playing a lot of Mothership yet. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to check out Mothership.
I've lovingly watched from afar of Mothership. It's in a basket. I know it's free, but it's in a basket waiting to be clicked. I just need to take the plunge. But take it away. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, as you pointed out, the core rule set is free as a PDF download from TuesdayNightGames.com. That's night with a KN. It's absolutely excellent. It's the basic theme is that it's a Ridley Scott, like, first Aliens film style horror game set in space. And you are able to create a horror experience for your players, whatever that looks like for you. It's really, really cool. And because, again, it is set up as a horror game as a core system, it means that there's lots of things that it kind of does away with. So you don't have a very complicated character creation process, because realistically this is probably going to be a one shot. You don't want to spend 3 hours making a character who's going to die 20 minutes in. So it does really simplify that process, which is great. And again, all the mechanics are based around what's going to lead into that horror experience. So every time you fail a roll, you gain stress. And the more stressed out you are, the more likely it is that you're going to panic and do something stupid. One of my favorite moments from the game that I've been playing, because our game is a little more goofy, it's a bit more Red Dwarf than Ridley Scott, but one of my players was he failed a roll because he had this idea to rig up this automated robot to to kind of keep these automated lights on so that they weren't in the dark while they were working on this air unit. And so he's like, well, I'm going to go down to the waste unit and do this. Like, rolled a critical failure. So he's like, so basically he finds himself in the trash room, like with a vacuum cleaner with a bucket on its head that he just like drapes a scientist's jacket over and just like writes the word android on the bucket. But then he starts hearing a noise and everything starts getting really tense, and he rolls a panic check and he fails. And this is my favorite thing about this system, is it leaves you these wonderful moments for characters for players to kind of color in the details of how their characters react in that moment. And God bless him, he starts freaking out and starts dragging this quote unquote android out of the trash room. Like, come on, Todd, we got to get out of here. Come on, I'm not leaving you behind, buddy. And so he panics so much that he ends up being caught by this mysterious thing that's in the shadows because he's trying to drag a vacuum cleaner out of a trash dump. Which again was just so great, and it was so fun having that moment, and like I said, having a system for players to really dig into what does it look like when you panic, which is really cool.
Sounds a little bit like the Year Zero engine. Is it anything like, if you've played from Free League stuff like Alien and stuff like that?
I've not played Year Zero. I've seen it. I've not actually run any games of it.
That works very similar. It has a mechanic of D6 pool where you have stress levels, and for each point of stress you get, you gain an additional dice on top of your pool to equate for the fact that your senses are a little sharper the more stressed out you are. However, once those dice are in play, any ones rolled on them, being that they're different color to differentiate them, any rolls on them then leads to like a panic roll, which is a big table full of everything from getting the shakes to going into a full catatonic state and dropping on the floor in a fetal position. And so it very quickly and heavily swings the game, because all of a sudden somebody who's leading the pack and knows where they're going drops on the floor in a state of sheer panic, and the xenomorph is on top of everyone. And I had a friend instantly die because the first xenomorph they came up against, he decided to throw himself up against it with a blowtorch and did damage to it, but forgetting the fact that aliens have acid for blood, and the acid spewed onto him, and he rolled on the damage table, which again is a separate table, and he rolled one of the few sort of back end of the table instant death rolls, and so burned to death immediately upon fighting the xenomorph. So it has a very heavy sort of swing on the game depending on how it goes. But the stress mechanic made me think of that very much.
Yes, it's a little bit similar. You don't actually get boons for it. The thing I also like about it is, again, mechanically very simple. It's a D100 system, so all of your stats have a numeric value to them. If you roll under the value, then you succeed. If you roll over it, you fail. And it does mean it's really easy. There's no maths. There's no kind of thinking about things. You of course have modifiers that you can add or subtract based on circumstances, but yeah, it does give you a very clean system where you're not constantly having to think about, oh God, I have to worry about this mechanic. It's all kind of on the character sheet, which is really lovely. But yeah, like I said, I highly recommend it. Again, the core rule set is free, so you really have no excuse not to check it out. If you do plump for the rest of the documentation, for new DMs, the Warden's Guide, which is their version of the Dungeon Master's Guide, that is exceptional at telling people how to actually set up games, and it includes so much stuff about like how to structure sessions, how to make notes for your sessions, how to actually prep things. Again, stuff that the DMG never even begins to touch, and it's so nice to actually have like that actually come up and be a core part of the learning experience, which is really great. And also, it has this really amazing kind of aesthetic. So if you go on the website and have a look at the manuals, it's all this kind of a grungy punk aesthetic, which really gives this very very specific vibe to it, and it's very evocative. And yeah, I think it's absolutely spectacular. So yeah, I'm going to stop gushing about Mothership until the next time somebody asks me about it, which probably won't be very long. I do seem to be crowbarring it into a lot of conversations these days.
That's very, very cool. Hearing you talk there a little bit about the sort of some of the lacking things from sort of Dungeon Master's Guides in 5th edition, it was interesting circling back on the Mike Mearls interview, seeing he talked about his exit from Dungeons and Dragons into Magic the Gathering, and called out that one of his goals was to get the online side of things that obviously Wizards are very much moving into now with D&D Beyond and their online tool sets. His goal was to make something that was pretty much dedicated towards GMs as opposed to players, because they've got a great resource in D&D Beyond for players. And granted, it is good for GMs too, but I think his goal was to try and get something specifically geared towards helping GMs. And it sounds like that just wasn't on the cards at the time, which was a sort of a factor, maybe not the reason that he exited, but it was a factor in his exit. That was interesting to hear.
Yeah, which is also insane if you think about it, because that is yet another big ancillary business. You've got people like Foundry and Roll20 and all these other companies like making stuff for DMs. It's like, you should do that because you're the guys who make the damn game. It's your game, guys.
And as we well know, especially speaking as people from an agency for GMs for hire, there is a dramatic imbalance in the number of people who want to play the game as players versus the number of people who will run games for them. And surely that you need GMs who know what they're doing, or at least can find resources to help them know what they're doing in order to keep the game successful, because otherwise you're stranding players out there who just can't find somebody to run the game for them. It's a baffling decision.
And I know that they are doing their D&D 1 or whatever they're called, the digital tabletop. And I think if that does end up working how people want it to work, where it's a fully integrated with all your online D&D books and stuff and all the information set, it will make, for me personally, running D&D games through it incredibly easy. So hopefully that is something that happens. But yeah, it does seem baffling to me that you don't, like the GM side of it really is where you need to invest, because GMs create players for their games. They're the ones who essentially recruit. I mean, I know that's how I started as a GM. I was interested in playing Dungeons & Dragons. I was like, well, I guess I have to GM because no one else is I can't force someone else to do this for me. So I'll have to then...
bands have bass players. It's like you've got 3 guitarists and somebody has to play bass.
Speaking as that person from school, I was that guy. I wanted to play guitar and we needed a bassist, and so I ended up being the bassist. That I am that guy.
Yeah, a lot of GMs happen the same way.
I want to be in a band. I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, I guess I'll do the thing that nobody else seems to want to do.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be the bass player, man.
Well, look, I'm not even talented enough to be the bass player, so I just do the hitty things with the sticks. Play drums. So
that's only tongue in cheek. I know there's a lot of very accomplished bassists out there and people to aspire to.
I'm sure we'll think of one any day now.
Ben, I know you've only got a short amount of time with us remaining, so thank you very much for joining us here today. We've managed to get your news and a little tale from the table there with your bucket-headed android, which was a lot of fun to hear. Anything else you wanna add before you have to shoot?
Nothing in particular. Just that I'm really, really, really looking forward to Rolldark Fest Leicester, which is coming up in a couple of months. If you haven't got your tickets yet, I believe there might be still 1 or 2 left. I can't say anything because obviously everything is still under wraps. But yeah, I've seen the story that we've knocked up for this one, and it's looking pretty special. We had a meeting with Rob, the head of Rolldark, where we kind of ran through the script and talked about things, which was really cool. And also, we got to make fun of his truly, truly terrible accents.
I can't wait for Rob to be listening to this as he edits.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. No, literally at one point it was because we had the script. Somebody who couldn't make it is like, "Oh, I'll fill in for this one." This is like, I say, King, what's going to happen is I'm going to prove it. And they're like, "Wait, is Terrence and Philip like going to be part of this production?
I hope so.
Oh no, yeah. So yeah, if that doesn't happen now, then Rolldark Fest Leicester, total waste. No.
We are all, I believe, all three here around this podcast at the moment, and JC and Rob will all be there. So if you've been listening to the podcast and you're gonna be there, or you think you might want to grab a ticket, it's a chance to speak to all of us too, which would be great to see you there.
Absolutely,
yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah,
Right. I'm going to run, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a genuine pleasure. And I hope to see you all again soon. Have a great rest of your podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I know it is. Yeah, it's on, isn't it?
We'll have you back. Yeah, we'll have you back very
Bye,
soon.
Ben.
See you later. All right. So, James,
More news?
more news. Yeah, there's a few more articles on there. Is there anything that you want to call out here?
No. So I have seen some interesting stuff about what's happening at Universal.
Yes.
So I will want to touch on that at some point, but I would like to go back to the whole D&D is uncool again thing. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
I think it's taken some backlash, and I think people are going out and exploring. Once they've been bought into D&D, they're then going out and looking at other tabletop RPGs. But I still think D&D is an entry point for most TTRPGs, especially for kids at a young age. And I think a lot of that will just be that schools will have clubs set up and they'll do D&D. They're not going to have like Call of Cthulhu is going to be running. Maybe a Star Wars like game if the teacher is particularly into tabletop RPGs. But
yeah,
what you're most likely to get, and I know my partner Jade at her school, I'm pretty sure there's like a Warhammer maybe and a D&D club that the school does at primary school. But those it's like the two big things that the kids are into. So and they're sort of isolated from all the drama of the yeah.
I think you're right, and D&D is almost synonymous with tabletop role-playing games. It's kind of like people see them when you talk about tabletop role-playing games. If people even have a vague idea of what it is, D&D is almost a synonym of tabletop role-playing game because they think that's what it is. Yeah. I think I have a sneaking suspicion that the D&D is uncool thing has been taken a little bit out of context to become a sensationalized headline of that interview. Right. I think probably his intention was more along the lines of, and I think he's right, saying that D&D can't really rest on its laurels anymore as considering itself, Michael Jackson or the Beatles or Prince, these people who in the day, they were it. They were the everything. And even if you didn't like their music, you couldn't escape them. You knew who they were. You heard their music. You saw them on TV. Massive appearances, huge sellout concerts. That they were icons.
Yeah,
that still are. They still are icons now. And we don't really. We have a lot of very popular artists. Maybe people like Taylor Swift are about as close a comparison as we can get now. But still, there's so much music and so many ways to get at it that you don't really have those one or groups of people anymore that are it. And I think that's the point, and I agree with that. But still, I don't think D&D is uncool anymore. In fact, it's about as cool as it's ever been right now.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess part of it is also, and I need to ramble a little bit because I've lost my train of thought. Oh no, it's totally gone. That's it. It's left my brain. I had a thought, and I'm so tired. I think today that it is
dropped out.
It's dropped out. No, but yes, I can't. I think the thing is, D&D is so big now within the tabletop community. Is that it's almost always that first touchstone, and then you go off from there and do other things. It is, and I feel like a lot of systems sort of aren't supported as well as D&D, especially with things like D&D Beyond, because the ease at which it is to make characters. There are some other websites I know. So for Call of Cthulhu, there's a website called Doll's House that you can do a digital or digitally create your character sheet where you can't really go wrong because it's all drop-down menus, and that is perfect for introducing new players. So I think that is, I think for me, if more games did that, had a digital version where you could create very simply character sheets with drop-down menus, it'd be so much easier to get into other tabletop RPGs. I think that is a big thing. I'd like to see more of that, really, and it doesn't need to be something crazy and elaborate like D&D Beyond. It could just be a character sheet with a drop-down menu where you can only select certain things, and so you can't go wrong. Like, yeah, I imagine coding it is probably far more complex than I'm making it seem with my request. But
probably the biggest alternative to D&D Beyond at the moment that's doing that with other systems is Nexus and Demiplane. Which has things like Alien and some of the modifious stuff like Fallout and Star Trek and Vampire the Masquerade, which now is coincidentally owned by Roll20.
Oh yes, of course it is.
They bought that out.
I can sort of see through Roll20 doing that, but even the Roll20 character sheet
finicky
stuff is finicky still.
Yeah,
like it's a bit of a pain in the ass. So yeah, if they could improve that, or maybe just systems coming out that do have very easily streamlined character sheets or whatever, had their own version of that. But like a company like Modifius, they I imagine have the resource to build something for their game system to create their characters online in their own sort of ecosystem.
Possibly that would be cool. I know I'd be first in the queue.
Yeah.
To continue the music analogy, I think a lot of people, I think D&D's in a position now where, in the music world, it's common to hear people say that when their favorite band starts getting to the point that they're playing stadiums and things like that, to say they're selling out. They've become too big to like them anymore because they're too mainstream. And I think D&D maybe has a little bit of that to contend with, is people say, oh, well, it's so popular now that I don't want to play. I'm going to play that cool sort of ugly cousin over there, that Pathfinder. I'm going to go there. But I don't think that would be the case.
No, I don't think. I think it is just at that level of accessible, and I guess I get that is a complaint that a lot of older players have. I don't think it's not something I've heard from new players saying, "Oh, this isn't complex enough." When I have new players come to the game, it's older players who are like very well versed in all the existing rules. Are like, they're dumbing it down, which I guess is a very similar thing to like, pop music's homogenized or whatever. They've changed, they've become more pop. Okay, whatever.
They're in, as long as they can keep the trajectory that they're on, I don't think they have anything to worry about. Even with juggernauts like Critical Role coming out with their own systems, I still don't think they're going to have anything to worry about if they can keep up the momentum. Warhammer is in a very similar, or was in a very similar position, still kind of is, in that now in the world of, we've talked about it before, the world of 3D printing, and many other systems of tabletop war games coming into the fore. There's this great Star Wars one, there's a great Marvel one, there's a lot of great sort of ships and fantasy ones.
Yes,
they still. I'll finish with this point. They still, every time they release new miniatures, I think, man, they've still got it. They've still got it. They're still the number one. They're still at the top. And if they can keep that momentum, they always will be. And I think D&D's in a similar position. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, you're totally right when you say that there are other, like, I don't even know if they are contenders, but like side shoots off Warhammer for tabletop battle games. So the Star Wars one. So where I ran a game for a really great group for someone's birthday out of a board game cafe in London, the name of which has now eluded my memory. But in there were tables and tables set up, and it was about 50% Warhammer tables, and then maybe 2/3 Warhammer tables, and a third was other tabletop games. And there was a DC one that I saw being played, a Marvel one. There was a Star Wars game that was being played as well, and in fact, even near me, out in the sticks of Cambridgeshire, there's a brand new board game / tabletop war. In fact, it's a tabletop war game shop that's open because they only did war games. And Warhammer 40k wasn't in their initial like stock. It is now, but when they first opened, and for like maybe the first year, they didn't stock any Warhammer at all, and they're still going. So clearly it proves that there are plenty of other systems out there that people are playing and buying models for and stuff, even in relatively small communities. So
yeah, we'll see. I don't think Dungeons and Dragons is in a dangerous spot right now. I think they're still kings of the hill, and I think they will be for a little while yet. It just, as I say, it just remains to be seen whether they can keep the momentum, because they've reached the top of the hill. They just need to be very careful not to go over the other side and tumble down.
Yeah,
and if they can do that,
they're a comfort blanket RPG as well. I think for me, if I will go and try other systems, but I'll come back to D&D. It's nice. It feels like home. As long as they don't fuck it up anymore.
I think
but
because D&D is so sort of setting agnostic, it's so like you can be so free with what you do with the rule set, as opposed to other systems which in general, not always the case, but in general, are very specifically geared to a specific either genre or IP. And if you're not in the mood for that genre or that IP, Dungeons and Dragons is there to be whatever you want it to be. All the way up to, more sci-fi with Spelljammer, all the way down to a pirate campaign, to a gothic horror, to a sort of sword and sorcery, knights and dragons. It's so open that it is a comfort blanket to just be like, I can do what I want here. It's a big sandbox. I'm not limited to what I can play with. And it's got a nice, easy system.
Yeah, that's the problem I have with stuff like the Lord of the Rings RPG. Like, I love Lord of the Rings, have done since I was a kid. Like, probably my favorite property in the entire world. But I don't really want to play a Lord of the Rings RPG because I don't know. I feel like playing around in that world feels wrong somehow, and I don't really know why.
I can get that.
But I do want to try the Discworld RPG that's coming out. I know the Kickstarter's all fully funded and stuff.
That has a really interesting mechanic. A really interesting mechanic to it.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Exciting to play at. In a twist of events, a Pratchett-like twist of amusing coincidence, we have Ben back with us. Hi, Ben. Whether this whole saying goodbye to Ben gets edited out or not, if it doesn't, Ben is back, everyone. Welcome back, Ben.
He is back again. Yes, that meeting that I was absolutely having to get off for didn't happen. I sat in a Zoom meeting for 10 minutes waiting for somebody who didn't turn up. So never mind.
We've all been there.
Yeah,
it's good to have you back. We're just finishing up, I think, on sort of closing points on James's news call out, I think, unless there's anything else, James. No. You were talking on there. So I'll lead off with mine that I'm going to pick from the list that I put together, which is basically the early access of the Monster Manual, because I've been lucky enough to be able to take a look at that. And I've been reading through the book and absorbing it, and very interested in the book. I've said many times, this is my book. This is the book that got me into the game. This is the book I always look the most forward to. It's the book I try, whichever edition of the game, it's the book I always try and get hold of, whichever monster manuals there are, whether it's 1, 2, 3, Fiend Folio, and so on and so forth. I love monsters. Always have loved monsters, always will. And it's very interesting. Some of the takeaways from the book. It seems like high-level monsters, of which there are several more new ones to play with, certainly do look like they're going to kick a lot harder.
cool.
Some good examples include things like the Lich and the Archmage, as well as some of the ancient dragons. They really do look like they're going to kick really hard. And so you're going to need your wits about you to take these foes on. I know the Archmage in particular has been a sore point for GMs in the past for being a somewhat lackluster sort of suite of abilities that made them quite easy to bring down. It seems like that's not going to be the case. Their AC and health is buffed. Their suite of spells and abilities is changed to make them more offensive and dangerous. A very interesting play. So that seems like they've nailed that. Also, the inclusion of variants of monsters throughout the book is right. You know, there's 2, 3, 4 examples of creatures under most of the the sort of general ones you would expect. There's multiple types of gnoll, there's multiple types of vampire now, there's multiple types of goblin, multiple types of even things like Cyclopes. They have a new variant of Cyclops in the book, a sort of prescient Cyclops, a la sort of Krull fame.
I'm really glad I'm not the only person who immediately thought, it's like, wasn't that a thing from Krull?
Yeah, Krull, man. If you don't know Krull, go and know Krull, because it's Krull. So, again, lots of variants to play with. One thing, I don't want to say I'm disappointed by, because that would be too strong a word, but it was a little bit of a shame to see that of the some 80 plus new monsters, and they said new monsters, not new stat blocks. They said 85, I think, new monsters. The vast majority of that are not new monsters. They are just variants of existing monsters. And many of the ones that are brand new, we already knew about because they talked about them in the videos, such as the Blob of Annihilation, the Arch Hag, big constructs, sort of end game constructs and elemental cataclysms. Most of them are big new monsters to fill out the category of end game bosses. I can't think of a single example of a low to mid-level monster that's brand new. I've never seen it before. Perhaps some of the variants of the Revenant, where you have a swarm, like a Revenant swarm, and then a Revenant house, like a house that is haunted, that is cool. Like a living Revenant house with artwork of this sort of wooden plank house splitting to form a mouth with glowing from the inside like a jack-o'-lantern. Very cool. But it was a little disappointing not to see some creative new monsters on the board. Only other disappointment, and again, slightly too strong a word, is a lot of... I thought that maybe this would consolidate a lot of the monsters out of sort of what was Vorlow's and Mordenkainen's into this book. It has not. They are pretty much classic Monster Manual monsters. Things like Sorrowsworn, Nagpar, the Demon Princes and Archdevils and Archdukes and Duchesses are all missing from the book. All of those sort of things that came out later after the classic Monster Manual are not in the book for the most part. So you have to go back to those stat blocks as they are currently to play with those. So that was a shame, because with over 500 stat blocks, I was thinking that maybe they'd consolidated a lot of them in, but they have not. I was desperately hoping that since she's on the front of the limited edition cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide, that we would finally get a 5th edition stat block for Lolth. We do not. There are none of the Demon Princes in there at all. So hopefully she'll get a big coming out party, perhaps with a module or something in the future. I'm hoping still, fingers crossed. Lots of new NPC stat blocks, which are great, and a spread of levels this time. So a lot less low-level NPCs
nice.
to have to contend with. There's some higher-level stuff to play with in there, which is nice.
Yeah, that's always been a bugbear for me personally. So, that's nice to see a little bit of variation there.
The stat blocks look great. The artwork is superb for the most part. There's a few pieces I'm not so keen on, but that's always to be expected. And so the stuff that's supposed to be horrifying is horrifying. Like some of the monsters in the book are truly scary in the art. Very easy to use as is expected. Nicely sort of collated lists in the back of the book based on challenge rating, based on sort of area. What's the word I'm looking for? Environment. Stuff like that. So that's really nice. One thing that's missing from both the Monster Manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because there is a section called Creating Your Own Monster, but it's really not. I reread it again, and it's not in the Monster Manual. And what that really is take a stat block that exists, and these are the things you can tweak without changing the CR, and here's all the traits that you could possibly give them. Whereas in the 4th edition one, there was albeit the CR system, many agree is not ideal, it had a really great way of mathematically calculating how deadly your monster would be based on what you gave it. That's all gone. There's none of that whatsoever. So creating monsters is going to be a challenge, I think, for new players, more so than it has been in the past.
That's a real shame. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very much geared to just take an existing monster and tweak it and change what it looks like, and it's your new monster. which is fine. That's easy enough to do. And it's great that they're telling new GMs, hey, feel free to do that. This isn't set in stone. But yeah, that's all gone. The only other thing that's like gone that was a bit of a surprise is immunity to non-magical damage.
Yes, I think we did touch on that last week as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not even the werewolf is now immune to non-magical or silvered damage, which is probably the most sort of generally egregious example. I can see why they've done it. We talked about it last time, that they've done it to make martial classes more functional in combat. Then they're going to be in a situation where they're just beating a sword against a creature that's impervious to them and wasting a turn, which is fine. But I do think specific examples, like if you're going to blanket get rid of that, fine. But it would have been a fun, unique thing for something like the Lycanthrope to have, is only it has that.
Yeah, I mean,
the
for
thing
me...
is...
Sorry.
No, sorry. Yeah, so with stuff like that, I suppose it's up to the DM, you as a DM, to give them the opportunity to go and get silvered weapons or magical weapons to specifically focus on that. I think it's probably a lack of trust in DMs that's led to that being done, because really it is on us to make sure that's not an issue.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one thing that I have previously, and this has always really annoyed me, that like, yeah, they have these in 5th edition. You have monsters with magical resistance, but a lot of times, and a lot of DMs do resort to this, where it's just like, oh well, you have a +1 weapon that counts, so therefore it's like, as long as you're not like hitting them with a basic stick, then you're absolutely fine. So I think, yeah, it is getting around that problem, which, okay, fine. But I do think that, yeah, what they could have done really is have a more interesting mechanical way to come around that.
Yeah.
So, and again, like with werewolves, like it would be more interesting to me that it's like, you know what, they're not resistant to non-magical damage. They're resistant to damage, period, unless it's a silvered weapon. That would make it far more interesting to me. But yeah, I quite agree with James. It is a case of Wizards of the Coast not believing in their DMs and like putting bubble wrap around them. It's like, please don't play our game the wrong way.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose from their point of view, they're probably like, well, we're protecting players from being put in these situations that will put them off playing our game and buying our stuff. That's probably the sort of angle they'd come at it from. And I guess also maybe it'll stop kids who are playing by the book rules, which I don't know, as a child who played stuff like D&D, but I didn't play D&D as a very young child. Can imagine that they are homebrewing out the wazoo anyway, and so it doesn't really matter from that point of view. But maybe that is another point of view. They've gone, well, like if children are playing the game, maybe this is something we can circumvent so that the DM as a kid doesn't need to worry about this. But I imagine more so the buying stuff thing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that, as I've talked to more people about the latest edition of Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of seems to be kind of more part of the discourse, is that, because I'm hearing so many people say, oh, no, Pathfinder is so much better for martial classes, and it gives them so much more utility. So I do think there's maybe an element of that too, that they're like, oh, well, we need to make sure that, we're keeping up with what Pathfinder's doing. And I don't know. I'm not sure that's a great takeaway, because Pathfinder is doing its own very specific thing. And I think, again, this is also the curse of Dungeons and Dragons, historically trying to do lots of things and not necessarily doing a lot of them particularly well anymore.
I'm going to say it now. I would be fascinated to step through a multiversal Elseworlds portal and see what would happen if they released 4th edition D&D now. Because I can't help but wonder whether it would be as visceral a negativity as it was back in the day to it. Especially with martial classes, because of the way they handled that. I'm not saying it would be universally adored, but I can't help but think that perhaps it would be a lot more welcomed now than it was at the time, especially given that it was initially created with the idea of creating a a VTT for it, which ended up never seeing the light of day.
Yeah.
It was planned to be a digital game and very tactical with, grids and maps online. And it just never saw the light of day. So it sort of sat in this weird place of being a very tactically minded game with no online resource to back that up.
Yeah.
But now that there is one,
Plenty of them, yeah.
Plenty of them. I can't help but feel like it would be interesting to return and see what I've meant a few times to suggest playing 4th edition for a few people and just seeing how it plays and seeing what they think of it in comparison. Fascinating stuff with the martial classes. The other thing that's changed is lair actions are basically gone. They don't have lair actions at all anymore. What they've done in most cases of creatures that would have had a lair action is instead have the sort of, which they did have in the 2014 book, the sort of lair features, these sort of overarching things that are just common usually within a mile of that creature's lair. And some of those have been made more detrimental rather than just being, hey, the water's a funny color and, animals look different. And so
good. I like that.
There are some mechanical ones. I'll give you an example. And this is a slight spoiler for any players that might see themselves going up against a arch hag, which is the sort of BBEG hag that they've included in the book now.
Any of JC's players?
JC's players stop listening now. It's not a massive spoiler, but it's basically a feature that is prevalent around their lairs. Is called meddlesome magic. Any creature that takes a long rest while within a mile of its lair, the next time that creature casts a spell, it casts confusion on itself.
Oh,
which is a cool sort of weird effect that
is cool.
You imagine if you're going up against an arch hag, you're going to want to take a long rest, and a mile is a pretty big
quite a long way.
Yeah. So,
and especially if we're right outside, let's camp here before we go inside.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Because I hate when players do that. Yeah, no, we're on a bit of a time crunch, but we have taken a bit of a battering on the way here, so we should probably just camp right outside the BBEG's front door, right? That can't possibly go wrong. Well, now I've got a mechanic and a stat block that I could use to punish them.
you know what? One game I think one series of games is the absolute worst for putting that in people's minds. Dark Souls. Because Dark Souls, and especially Elden Ring, it's always a thing that you have a rest point immediately before a boss.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of cemented it in people's minds that, oh no, this is the normal state of affairs, that you have a rest before you fight a big enemy. So that does strike me as a very interesting way to get around that. And also a very interesting way to add a risk-reward mechanic. Do the players know about this? And if they do, how are they going to deal with that? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because then it's do you risk your spellcasters by resting within a mile? Because they have a chance to save against it. It's just the confusion spell cast upon yourself. So there is a chance to save against it. Or do you stay a mile away, rest, and then risk random encounters chewing your resources as you get to the lair?
Yeah.
Does it say leveled spell, or is it any spell? Because if they can, what I can see happening now immediately is cantrip, get it all out, confusion on yourself. How long does that last? A minute?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'll double check it. I think it's just casts a spell.
I might change that to a leveled spell, and I would probably, at the very least, the first time, give absolutely no indication of that. So they're in a situation where they want to use a leveled spell before that would go off.
Yeah,
because I'm a bastard apparently. So
yeah.
I mean, it's a fair assessment, but no, that does sound deeply entertaining. I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are going to be. A lot of them seem to be geared towards players taking long rests within the influence of a lair. Like the Green Dragon, if you take a long rest, you can end up having the poison condition for resting near its lair. Very thematic.
That does actually fix one big bugbear I've always had about lairs, is that, you've got lair actions which are cool, but why not lair effects? Because, like you said, you're literally having a nap in a dragon's lair. they're not just going to be like, oh yeah, go on, you have a little nap, just tuck yourself in. I'll bring him some Horlicks. There you go. No,
Kill you tomorrow.
Yeah.
I've just looked at Archhag. It does say a spell with a spell slot. Cast a spell using a spell slot. It also casts confusion centered on itself.
Oh, okay. I had an idea for getting around some of these long rest plans. If you make sure that whatever they're fighting is a higher level than them, but it's very clearly injured in some way. But if they take a long rest, then it takes a long rest and it regains all its hit points. Be like, well, you can go now and you might kill it, or you'll have to fight it at full health.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other interesting thing, and I'm interested to see kind of your guys' take on this, because I think that the core issue with a lot of the way people do things in Dungeons and Dragons is that sessions are too short. Because typically speaking, we have 4-hour games, because that's a nice like length of game for like you feel like you've got enough out of your game, but it's not like gone on so long that you can't feel your butt anymore and you're just tired of everything and you want to go home. Yeah. But realistically, because of how D&D's combat is set up, realistically, you need to actually fit in the 5 encounters a day. You need games to be 6 hours long, because each combat takes at least an hour. So realistically, an hour and a half. So if you're having 2 combats, that's 3 hours gone right there. And so to have like proper puzzles, like actual story encounters, and also a story around that, you can't fit all that if like 3 hours of your 4 hours is taken up with combat. You can't cram that into an hour. So realistically, you need an extra 2 hours to actually get it all in. And I think this is the thing that kind of annoys me about with the new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. It doesn't actually address that, and that is the core problem. When we deal with that, the rest of this stuff will actually kind of fix itself.
Yeah.
I do think there is a... Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I do think that from memory, I haven't seen it myself. I have been reading the books, but I can't remember offhand. But I did see an article where they pointed out that whole how many encounters and rests per day was just missing from the revised books. They just don't say that anymore. So
again, don't get me wrong. 5 encounters per long rest is a good rule of thumb. That is about right for balance, and especially for Dungeons and Dragons. So, not saying it isn't helping,
but yeah, but if you go into a session thinking per long rest, it depends. I suppose it depends what kind of game you are. So, what I'm finding running Tomb of Annihilation is obviously they go a hex, maybe 2 if they're rowing or if they're traveling fast. So they'll have, and I will have encounters, pre-rolled encounters prepped for however many days, but quite often it'll be more than 5 a day sometimes, or 5 between long rests. As they each go through a hex, you have to roll a certain amount of time. So if they're rowing at fast speed, they'll go through 4 hexes. So that's a lot of encounters to try and fit into a 4-hour session. But yeah, it's hard to not get burnt out on a 6-hour session. It's certainly not something I would want to do like multiple times a week. I think that would be tough.
It would be miserable. I'm not suggesting have 6-hour games.
But I'd be all right in the having run like days of D&D and like Rolldark Fest. That's 6 to 8 hours of D&D, and it does feel balanced. It does. I haven't heard any complaints from Rolldark Fest about the balance issues during a game or the length of the game. So I am presuming this is fairly agreed on that. Like, it does balance out quite well if you're playing D&D for that long. The amount of encounters and rests you get. I think maybe you'd have 1 rest in a 6 to 8 hour, like long rest in a 6 to 8 hour game, and that seems to work out fine.
Yeah, again for me, it does annoy me that, like, because they've changed so much about how they're positioning Dungeons and Dragons, and they're wanting it to be a role-playing game rather than a war game, which is what it started out as. And as Damien was quite rightly saying, that's why 4th edition was so geared in that. It was really a return to form in that respect. So yeah, I do think, like, if you are wanting to move into more of a role-playing space, you do need to make combat a little bit quicker. So
Yeah.
and again, there's so many systems out there. There's like Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse, where again they have these really fast, visceral combat systems where 20 minutes and you are done. You are like breathless at the end of that combat, and you feel like you've got the most out of it. And I think it's a shame that they're not addressing those things that slow down the game. They're kind of just like moving all the pieces around, going, "No, look, it fits." It's like it doesn't, not quite. It's a little bit janky, and you need to work on it, mate.
Maybe a way that would be interesting. I'm sure, like you say, there are other systems that do this, where just assume that your players and characters are balanced for one combat. So every combat, if you survive it, you get all your hit points back, you get your spell slot back, you get your abilities back. Maybe there's some out of combat abilities you don't get. You only get back on a long rest. And see how that. It would be interesting to see how that would work out, and then make long rests like an event in themselves. So each time you take a long rest, these things can happen. You get random things depending on where you are, what you're doing, who you've got with you, and things like that. Like what can happen while you're camped out on the road. But yeah, it would be such a huge departure from what they've already got, and I can see why that is something that probably to them seems like an insurmountable change to make at this point.
I think I'm quite fascinated to see what Matt Colville and his team with the MCDM, which I believe is currently called Draw Steel, their fantasy TTRPG, has done away with hit rolls.
Okay.
So there's no missed attacks. It's just damage dealt, and it sounds like it's very inspired by 4th edition actually, and it's a very tactical sort of grid by grid game with a lot of monsters moving players and players moving monsters, and they've just done away with the to hit roll. So it's sort of a chess match more than a rolling off randomly sort of fight.
Okay.
Yeah, that does sound cool. I mean, one thing I always really respect about Matt Colville is that, again, he is a war gamer at heart, and he really kind of cuts to the core of that. So, I would be very interested to see what system he comes up with, because I think he's definitely the right person to be going in that direction. But yeah, that does sound very interesting. I do like that idea. And as well, I think that's a good move, because like rolling to hit can often be a real damp squib, especially at higher levels.
Yeah.
Because like, oh, you need a 25 to hit. It's like, oh, I got 24. Oh, never mind. And you spend so many rounds of combat just doing that. And it's like, oh, well, you nearly hit him, but too bad.
Yeah, it does suck to see new players, especially rolling awfully in their first D&D game. You're like, oh god, this sucks. The amount of times I've just been like, the AC's one lower than it says in the book. This combat, because I can't take another miss for you. I feel so sorry for you. Like it's not a particularly challenging combat. This one, it's a bit of a random one. So let's not make you feel entirely powerless for the entire game.
My personal heartbreaker is when it's right at the end of a combat, somebody hits the enemy and they do like 10 points of damage, and the enemy has 11 hit points. It's like, oh no, the pain.
Depending on whether I think the players earned that kill, usually through other stuff like role play, like maybe if they did something else cool during the combat, I'm tempted occasionally to give it to them and just be like,
So what I do is I let them think the enemy's dead, and then it gets back up with its one remaining hit point. Because I'm a horrible person.
Oh god, I've probably saved this for I'll save this for my Tales from the Table. But I have a story about an enemy that does that.
That's actually a wonderful segue. I think we've probably covered my overall thoughts. Pretty happy with the monster manual. There's a few things I wish it would have had, but it doesn't. But in general, I think combat's going to be fun. It's going to be tough. Lots of buffs to damage and AC and hit points to a lot of monsters, especially those that don't have immunities now. They've just given them a raft more hit points to equate for that. So yeah, interesting. I'm looking forward to now with the 3 books getting to the table and really playing this out and seeing where it goes. And I look forward to speaking to you guys about it too. So, James, you hinted at a tale.
Yes. Yeah. So I am, for some friends of mine, running Odyssey of the Dragonlords, which I think I've said before. And so they got to the ancient glade area. So spoilers for Odyssey of the Dragonlords. Yeah, some very light spoilers. I'm going to be saying one of the many enemies that are in this particular area. But there is a... Oh, no, it's going to spoil some of the story as well. Right. Apologies for this. So they were fighting a dryad who had enchanted some young men and women. She had cooked the men and was about to feed them to the women when the party intervened. Unfortunately, they didn't manage to stop these enchanted girls from eating the flesh of their fellow man. And so 2 out of the 4 of them changed into these creatures called Maenads, which are sort of like fey, like corrupted fey spirit beings. And so they have an ability that means when they get to 0 hit points, they can roll on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw, of which they have a +2 con, to come back up with 1 hit point. So it took about half an hour to finish these 2 off, as they continually, even with silvery barbs thrown at them, passed these Constitution saving throws every time they went down to 0. I kept rereading the ability to check that it wasn't just the first time they hit 0. No. It doesn't specify that, so I believe that it was just a continual fight. They weren't the only creatures in there, but they ended up surviving the longest and doing the most damage, despite being random minions of the boss, really, that can be totally avoided in the fight. But they were brutal, because they kept going down, but they were recklessly attacking, so they kept getting hits on, but they would just go down to 1, or go down to 0, be straight back up to 1, spend their turn standing up, and then just stabbing the players again and again and again. And they've got multi-attacks. They're doing lots of damage, despite only using daggers. So it's like a D4. Yeah. I think it's like a D4 +4 damage. But like, the players are level 3, so like you do that for long enough, and I think
really
2 or 3 of them were down. Yeah, 2 of them were down at one point. It got really brutal. So anyway, I'm really enjoying the campaign.
Players not so much, but
I said last week, I'm very deep in that campaign now, and it is pretty brutal. There's some monsters with some really hard kicking abilities that they've. You can at once. It's a brilliant campaign, but it also, you can very much tell that it's a third party campaign. That there's a few things that they've done that you just know wouldn't fly with a Wizards released product. On that note, just a sort of a fair warning for anybody that's planning on running it. It is superb, but just a content warning that there are a few places in the book that, and this is one of them, that are extremely dark, and definitely make sure with your players. It's always good to have a session 0 and deal with sort of veils and lines and all those kinds of things. But with this book in particular, make sure you've read it and make sure you either tailor it or make sure your players are on board, because that's not the darkest thing in the book.
No.
There are a few things in the book which are really, really dark, and you definitely need to make sure that people are either on board or you tweak it in such a way as to be concealed or something else entirely.
Have proper safety tools.
Yes.
Cannot say that enough times. Have safety tools with your group.
Yeah.
You need them.
Yeah. When cannibalism isn't the worst thing in the book, you're like, yeah, okay. Maybe it's a little bit of a dark campaign.
Yeah.
There's just a little bit of cannibalism.
There's one instance of a character in the book, a key character in the book, that likes to tell jokes, and it gives you some suggested that jokes that are not supposed to be funny and are supposed to be dark, and it gives you some suggested jokes for that character to give. And I didn't use any of those jokes.
I've not got to that part of the book yet, but I'll keep an eye out.
It's late on, but check out those jokes, because they're very, very triggering, and worth double checking. But that all is to say, it is one of my favorite campaigns I've run, and it is a superb book. So yeah, take that with a pinch of salt on its content. Incredible. Anything else, James, with your tale to cover?
No, not with that tale. I have another. If I could do my second tale, then I'm done, and I can enjoy yours.
Sure.
I had so I had I'm doing Tomb of Annihilation, and I had a group who were going down one of the rivers in canoes. They had 5 canoes they'd bought from Port Nyazaru, and we're going down. The first encounter with these giant wasps that swarmed them, critted and almost killed someone instantly. I realised that all of my stories are sounding very similar. The enemy's crit, and someone died. No, but our wizard decided to speak with animals, talk to the wasp, found out that the rations that the players were carrying with them were triggering the wasps into a defense. And so they very cleverly, of course, when you're sailing down a jungle river, was like, well, that's fine. We'll just put all our food into bags and we'll put them in the water and drag them behind the boats attached to ropes, which of course went well for all of 1 or 2 hours, and then a giant crocodile ate all their supplies and attacked. As he was intelligent enough to like, ooh, rations. So they're stranded in the jungle with no rations at all at the moment. And I thought that was quite fun because they spent the first like half an hour of the session going shopping, planning out, being like, okay, how many rations are we getting? We need rain catchers. We've got canoes. We're all set up. First encounter. Okay, I guess we have to like we'll have to do this to the rations. And then almost immediately they're all gone. So that is them stranded in the jungle hunting for birds. In fact, it is a miracle they didn't die. But one of the rangers then went off hunting to try and find food when they took their long rest for the day, came across a pack of 13 like large herbivore dinosaurs and just obviously shot one. So the entire pack attacked him. He was knocked unconscious or onto death saving throws, and luckily, as they weren't carnivores, they didn't feel the need to eat the body. So he was eventually rescued by his teammates. But yeah, it's a good job we didn't die because the death curse would have prevented that ranger from coming back.
Yeah, that's one of the more interesting things about that whole book is if you die early levels in that book, there's no coming back. It's interesting. I'd love to try that in the meat grinder mode that it suggests as well, where it buffs the death saving throw to a 15 or higher.
That's what I'm going with. In fact, I've made it worse because I've made it so they only get 1 death saving throw, and it's either a pass or a fail.
That's crazy.
Nasty.
Because I am cruel. You don't know my players; they deserve it.
It's a cruel book. There's some, especially late game with the titular tomb. Yeah. There is some cruel stuff in it, and I love it.
Weirdly, I've run the tomb separately, like as a one-off for some friends, and yeah, it's insane. There's the like ball that can just shoot someone into the sun.
Yeah,
and I had that happen the first time I ran just the tomb. They were like, "Yeah, I'll get in." Okay, your character finds himself on the surface of the sun. I'm sorry, they're dead.
Yeah. There's a few. If they get to 0 hit points, they are turned to ash or turned to paste. Or there's one monster that if it crits, it beheads the character immediately. Crazy stuff. But if you're into that level of classic dungeon crawl, sort of deadly encounters, it's a lot of fun to run.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting further and further into it because the jungle crawl and like the hex crawl is a new thing that I've not really done in games before. So I'm sort of having fun with that at the moment and planning out the encounters. I'm not doing it totally randomly because I think there's better ways to feed story into those random jungle encounters. But like I'll throw a few random like monster combats and stuff they see in the jungle, but I'm trying to also feed like, okay, they need to encounter some red wizards, you need to get Artus Simba in there somewhere that are like some of the frost giant-y stuff. I'm pretty hoping that my players aren't listening to this now actually.
It's maybe pre-warn them. It is a big map to hex crawl, and potentially miss some key points if you don't do a little bit of above the table guiding.
Yeah, there's also like a third of it that has no major landmarks in it.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
the whole like bottom right hand side. You can cut that off from the lake to the east of the lake, the larger lake. And
Oh, wow.
You don't need that. There's great additional modules and stuff that I've been looking at that do add stuff to those locations. But if the players get really, really lost all the way in the jungle down that end, there's nothing story-wise there for them unless you put it there.
Yeah, you've got to be careful with that and make sure you sort of guide them to some of the key points just to make sure they hit them. And in good time as well. They're not spending weeks and weeks and weeks just hex crawling. If you don't mind, then I'll quickly take mine because mine's quite quick to cover. Last week, I talked about Fallout, which continues to be absolute madness. And at the back end of the session, I talked about the fact that a character had...
rodeo robot.
Yes, the characters had encountered a Deathclaw being ridden by a super mutant who basically gave them the stand and deliver to give it all their stuff, and it very quickly fell apart as they made the Deathclaw buck and throw its rider, and then jump to the rider to try and encourage the rider to bring the Deathclaw to heal and not disembowel all of them, because they have all played Fallout. They know how deadly a Deathclaw is. And yeah, we made it quite clear at the start of this campaign that random encounters are random encounters. If you come up against a Behemoth or a Deathclaw, it's there. It's not going to hold back. So you find a way out of that situation. It's the risk of running around in the wasteland, just like in the game. And the last sort of thing of the session was that the Mr. Handy robot, Dr. Clover, had flown up onto the back of the Deathclaw and was taking the reins to try and control the creature. We opened the session with the Dr. Handy's Mysterious Stranger perk kicking in, which was randomly determined, and it kicked in off a random dice roll. And so the Mysterious Stranger showed up and basically had to determine whether it was going to shoot the super mutant or whether it was going to shoot the Deathclaw, because there were two threats and it doesn't differentiate between them. It just turns up and shoots and does an absolutely obscene amount of damage. It ended up nearly killing the super mutant, blowing one of its legs off. And so it was in no position to negotiate with the Deathclaw. The rest of the party took this opportunity to run for the hills, just put all their action points into getting as far away as possible. Leaving the Mr. Handy sat on the back of the Deathclaw, who basically threw both arms up, grabbed hold of the Mr. Handy and launched it across the map. It was a Catherine wheel of metal that somehow managed to weather all of that damage. It was a really low damage roll, and so he weathered all of it with his armor plating that he's got on, and so managed to just end up being this oddly shaped ball that the Deathclaw threw. The Deathclaw then proceeded to utterly disembowel the super mutant, mercilessly tear it to shreds, and then hunt the players through the Commonwealth with a series of contested rolls to see if they could cover their tracks well enough to escape the Deathclaw, which eventually, thankfully, they did. And so, if you've been listening to the podcast, you may remember there was a previous encounter with a Deathclaw that turned up and then ran away because it was running away from something bigger. This is the second time the players have randomly encountered a Deathclaw, and the second time they've narrowly escaped having to fight it. So it feels like they're on borrowed time now.
Well, I can't wait for them to run into a one-legged Deathclaw in the future, and you'd be like, it recognizes your smell immediately.
Well, it was the super mutant that lost its leg, but the Deathclaw definitely has their scent now, and so it will be interesting to have a potentially recurring Deathclaw that is on the prowl for these particular people. Yeah, and now they're on their way to a unique location to the campaign that is not in Fallout 4, which is the sort of default setting for the campaign, is the Commonwealth in Boston, called Mirage, which is a rolling emporium of casinos and hotel rooms and all these things that sits outside of the deadly winter that's currently assailing the Commonwealth and is pulled by a huge a huge herd of Brahmin, just pulling it along the ground on these great huge wheels that has an important part to play in the continuing story. So they've sold all the crap that they've accumulated to get enough caps to comfortably step into a casino and start playing at the big tables to try and take the story into its next logical location. So
Is
that's going to
Mirage
be a lot of fun.
I'm sorry, is Mirage something you've come up with, or is it a beneficial?
No, it's sadly I wish it was. It is an actual campaign module that they've released for the Fallout campaign.
Oh, okay.
So it has a few unique locations over and above the ones that you would already find in Boston. So
Cool.
Okay.
Very cool. Ben, do you have a tale from a table that you'd like to share?
Do I?
That's the spirit.
So I've alluded to my Mothership campaign that I'm running with a private group of players, having the most fun with it. As I said, it's slightly silly, but that's the group I've got, and we all enjoy ourselves, so it's great. In our second full adventure, we because they are on a ship called the SS Troubadour. They're on basically a long haul vessel that just ships stuff from one corner of the galaxy to the other and back again. As they're traveling along, they encounter a ship that looks very weird because, according to their personal knowledge, this ship is brand new. It's only just come out in the last year or two, but this ship appears to be at least 100 years old. It's battered. It's got pieces fallen off of it. So it's very peculiar. And as they step onto the vessel, they are accosted by what can only be described as a commune of communist robots, who are all deeply interested in these new fleshbag companions and are very interested to know if they want to seize the means of production. The things continue for quite some time. It turns out that the commune follows what they believe to be the reincarnation of Karl Marx, who's if you bear with me 2 seconds, I will try and get exactly what he said in this.
Robot Karl Marx, or like a human?
No, it's a robot Karl Marx. So, yeah, as
with
that's
the beard.
As the key message that they all repeat constantly is no gods, no masters, please wash your hands. As things go on, they eventually get to meet Marx, which turns out to be a Mark X matter reclamation unit. It is essentially a talking toilet, which is malfunctioning and, of course, is just spouting the occasional communist propaganda and urging people to wash their hands. And so they then have to, because they figured out that actually they need some stuff from this ship to make their own ship go, because it's kind of falling apart and they kind of maybe don't have an air supply system, which is bad. And that would be a good thing to have to make them not, die. So they're trying to work a way out that they can maybe get some of the material that's on this ship onto their ship without, being killed by a commune of communist robots. One of them, God bless his little cotton socks, the guy that I told you about before who created a quote-unquote android out of a vacuum cleaner with an upturned bucket on its head. His character Dave has a podcast, Skylark Tonight, and so he gets it into his head as like, oh no, I want to interview Marx for my podcast so we can get the message of communism out there, to use this as a cover to kind of cover up the tracks of the rest of his teammates. The robots instantly go insane for this idea and just whole hog throw all of their weight into it, and so they then find the quote-unquote android that's on their ship, whose name is Todd, and so they perform repairs to Todd. Doesn't actually imbue Todd with intelligence. It just gives him a voice box. So every now and then he'll just say, "I am Todd," just like very loudly.
World's most annoying Pokemon.
Yeah,
I am
like,
Todd.
yeah, just like every now and then someone will walk past it, it'll just go Todd, 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 and it literally says 3 things. It's like, "I am Todd, 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 Todd," and "have a Todd-tacular day." It's like those 3 things on a loop. And so like this is getting really out of hand. Like Dave gets this like sequined tuxedo so that he can talk to Marks on his podcast. And so as things are getting more and more insane, one of the crew, who is an android player, gets it into their head to contact Mercury, their ship's AI, who, for the reasons that I don't have enough time to quite go into, and maybe the players don't fully understand themselves yet, this computer is constantly stoned. So it is running on recursive code. So he just kind of talks like this, man. You know, he's cool. You know, I mean, he gets the ship from A to B, but he's maybe a little what do you call when you like say something and like you don't remember the thing that the words. I don't know, man. It'll come to me. But anyway, he's like, just kind of hanging out and stuff. And so they call him. It's like, "Hey, Mercury, can you help us out?" It's like, "Oh, sure, man. What do you need?" It's like, "Well, I mean, maybe you could, help mellow out these robots." "Oh, yeah, give them a dose of the good stuff." Yeah, I know what you mean, man. Yeah, that sounds cool, man. And so then infects the entire commune of communist robots with this recursive code. So the story ends with them now having an entire commune of communist robots who are permanently stoned, just hanging out on their ship. Who would tease them into production, but maybe later. Right now, they just hang out.
From my experience of communist communes, that doesn't sound totally out of the realms of possibility.
Yeah, So yeah, and honestly, still only the 3rd weirdest thing to happen on this campaign so far.
Okay, I need to check out Mothership. I think that's
yeah. Yeah, I mean, as anybody who's ever run Call of Cthulhu will tell you, the line between horror and comedy is paper thin. And yeah, I've just really leaned into the comedy aspects of that, and it's a lot of fun. I'm really, really having a great time with it.
Nice.
That's awesome. So cool. I'm definitely gonna check out Mothership. Although I suspect mine, probably just knowing me, will go much more older Ridley Scott and sort of cosmic dread than that sort of Red Dwarfish humor. But I can appreciate it. I can appreciate that. And you're right. The line between horror and comedy is the difference between a laugh and a scream. They're both tension and then payoff. With a physical reaction.
Yeah. One caveat to people who are considering running Mothership for themselves: it is an excellent system. It's very very easy to get into. It's not necessarily a drawback, but it is a consideration, and it's worth kind of thinking about this if you haven't encountered this style of game before. With Dungeons and Dragons, if you're prepping a session, it's quite easy to go, right, the players are going to start here, they're going to do this, there's going to be combat, and then the session will end. You've got a fairly good idea of where they're going to go, and it's quite simple. Prepping a session of Mothership is very different because you've got a very solid beginning. I know where this is going to start and what everyone's going to do. You've got a middle section where there's lots of options for people to do and the things they might explore and things they might go into. And then you have an ending, and you never quite know exactly. Something's going to happen, but you don't know exactly what or how it's going to get there. Honestly, them taking over the commune of communist robots with an interview, not on the cards. Absolutely was not part of my game plan. They came up with that, and I just went, yeah, all right, cool, we're doing that now. So you do have to be a little bit willing to just kind of roll with those punches. So that is something worth considering if you are thinking about running a game of Mothership. But aside from that, highly recommend. It is excellent, and again, the PDF for the core rules is free. You really owe it to yourself to check it out. That's TuesdayNightGames.com. That's night with a KN.
Awesome.
Lovely.
Incredible. All right, folks. We've gone a little long on this one, which was to be expected. There's more Monster Manual talk, and that's that's always a time cruncher. But I really appreciate you both joining me for this one. Ben, thank you for joining twice. So nice you joined twice. Thank you for coming along, and thank you for pushing me in the direction of Mothership.
Yep.
It's going to happen pretty much the minute I close this call. Thank you, James, for joining me as always.
No problem. I got here eventually. Yes, I was late, which
Indeed.
is why Ben's time was a bit limited. But luckily, we got him back, so it's all
Yay!
fine, right?
Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us this week. Episode 53 is in the can. We'll see you next week for 54. Hopefully, we'll have JC back for that one.
Woo!
Yeah, indeed. And we'll take this week as it comes and have plenty more tales for you at the other end. Have a fab week, everyone. Have a fab week, guys. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Go Eagles.
Yeah!
Go Eagles. Yay, sports.
Yeah.
See you later, folks.
Bye.